Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank you for the brilliant organization of this significant conference and for accepting my paper proposal, and especially for the possibility to attend this wonderful meeting online. Among numerous and various musical genres in the catalogues of Edison Bell Penkala, we may notice proportionally smaller number of the recordings of church music. We may single out the examples of both the Eastern and Western Christian tradition, the examples of Russian choral music sung by Croatian Singing Society Lesinski, for example, or the Russian church choir and the church quartet of the Orthodox Church in Zagreb, various performances of Christian songs by Catholic and Orthodox origin, the parts of the repertoire of Croatian singing societies Turopoljac and Nova Zora, the recordings by Singing Society Vijenac by theologists of the Archdiocese in Zagreb. As it was mentioned in the abstract in this paper, I aim to present the specific edition of Edison Bell Penkala from 1933 in the domain of genre of church music, named the Conservatory of Serbian Orthodox Church Chant, or Rasadnik Srpskog pravoslavnog crkvenog pojenja. Mostly on the basis of the archival material available so far, I will indicate the role of the edition in complex processes of preservation of the aforementioned musical practice and point out selected aspects of the production, distribution, and perception of this edition, particularly in the middle of the 20th century. At this point, I would like also to express special gratitude to Professor Katz and his keynote lecture, which brought the unique encouragement and the support for further thinking and deepening of the key issues of my research as well. Based on the older Greek, Byzantine, and medieval Serbian chant, at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, the traditional Orthodox Serbian chant has been set in its current form. After the great migrations of the Serbs to the Habsburg monarchy, the musical tradition with Byzantine basis and with the roots in the work of the Slovenian brothers Cirilo and Metodije continued its living and gradually modified in the new cultural space, being adapted to the music of Western Europe and the Europeanized Russian church music. Nevertheless, the need for preservation of the spiritual identity and religious affiliation was dominant among Serbs in Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that need also affected this field of cultural and musical creativity. The uniqueness of the traditional Serbian chant lies just in the specific mix of all the above-mentioned elements, together with the traditional folk music elements as well. During the 19th century, this practice was cultivated among Serbs living in different geographic and cultural spaces that used to belong to the two empires, today belonging to different national countries. It flourished primarily in the monasteries and in the seminaries and secular schools on the territory of the Metropolitanate of Karlovci in Austro-Hungary, but also among the Serbs in the Ottoman Empire. It was part of both the liturgical and the private life of the Serbian people across several geopolitical frameworks. Transmitted exclusively as oral tradition for decades, it was written down for the first time in the middle and afterwards through the second half of the 19th century. The Balkan Wars and the First World War had stopped the melographic work, as well as the research and projects of publication of the traditional church chant, and afterwards the deep post-war changes in the state and in the church also reflected this field of musical creativity. Except the music notated collections, the sound recordings have enormous value as the authentic sources for preservation and for research of this practice, and their importance was even greater in the context of the social political circumstances in the 20th century, concerning strong influences on the preservation, cultivation, and survival of chant. From the creation of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which brought new education laws in force and removed church chant from the school curriculum, to the creation of the socialist state and the period unfavorable for the preservation, but especially for the study and performance of religious musical heritage. The first shellac records of the Serbian chant have been insufficiently researched so far, and they may serve as unique scientific sources of information and mediators in constitution of musical practice and musical tradition, as main documents for research and research tools of a kind, which help learning, close listening, transcription, critical analysis of musical content. The oldest known audio recordings with the melodies of the Serbian chant were published on the 78 RPM records in 1930, and that was Columbia Records edition of the Serbian church tercet, performing several liturgical hymns on Christmas and Resurrection. 3 years later, the first complex project of recording of the traditional church melodies was conducted with the idea of creation of an extensive collection of the most important hymns from the annual liturgical order of the Serbian Orthodox Church. The main organizer and the sponsor of the edition was Čeda Dimitrijević, a well-known merchant from Pest and a good connoisseur of church chant, and the key participant was Lazar Lera, teacher and exceptional chanter who had studied at the very source of this tradition among the well-versed and respected chanters in Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the 19th century. The edition, under the title, as we already said, was published in 1933 in the Edison Bell Penkala publishing house, the center of the whole Yugoslav record industry in the first half of the 20th century. In the interwar period when the Conservatory was published, Serbian church chant had stopped being an obligatory subject in teacher training colleges and state schools in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which led to the significant drop in numbers of skilled teachers and chanters. Despite of these huge changes, the chant was cherished on the inherited habits, mostly in Vojvodina, in villages and towns. During the winter months, lessons in chant were given to laics by prominent chanters, both priests and laymen. They strived to teach the youth, singing by heart or by using various notational collection in didactical purpose, but that wasn't enough because of the lack of musical education. With full awareness of such condition, the bearer of the project, Dimitrijević, saw the solution in the project of audio recording. As can be seen in his and Lera's manuscript legacies, the main goal of the project was to enable those interested in church singing to learn the basic liturgical repertoire and the fundamental chanting skills. The recorded material, as well as numerous hymns that Lera had written down in musical notation, is the authentic testimony of the tradition as it was cultivated at the territory of the former Austro-Hungary, even more specific for the former local practice among the Serbs north of the Sava and the Danube. The collection contains hymns of the general and festal chant from the Oktoihos and the memorial service. As the conception of the collection was adapted to the educational purposes at first place, the first group of songs from the liturgy, selections of hymns from the Vespers and festal Treparia, was intended for the school children, while the more complex hymns from the second part, those of the so-called great, highly melismatic chant, were intended for those who were more advanced in chanting skills. In the recorded collection, Dimitrijević saw a possibility to preserve this chanting practice even in the most remote towns and small villages, among laymen without any musical education. The idea and the new edition was highly innovative for the learning process as a sort of substitution for the live contact with the teacher. One of the distinguishing aspects of this thinking was the perception of the recordings as contribution to formation of a uniform traditional chant of a kind. Such an attitude, confirmed in several public statements by Dimitrijević, might be observed in the context of rethinking the national musical canon of its kind in the field of church music practice. Indisputably, Lera's role in preserving the tradition wasn't just practical, but also in the domain of theoretical thought. In the sphere of church music, the issue of the determination is connected primarily to the process of setting the melodies to the liturgical texts, the so-called tailoring of the melodies of the Oktoihos in accordance with the essence of the hymnographic points. Lera's professional views and chanting practice were based on the inherited oral practice and detailed comparative analysis of the records of his predecessors from the 19th and 20th century. Lera's personal style of interpretation was marked by notably slow singing, specific for the aforementioned practice, also with very precise annunciation of text and recognizable metro-rhythmic frameworks specific to certain hymns and melodies. And I thought that it would be nice to hear an audio example. I chose one of the Paschal stihieras with the characteristic melodies of the fifth mode. So I have just to go back for this slide. I hope you will hear it. Is it better?
It's perfect.
Okay. So on. The contract by the Edison Bell Penkala dictated minimum annual production of 3,000 records during the 5 years period, and also the obligation of the collaborators to work exclusively with Edison Bell Penkala until the end of the project. Unfortunately, so far, I haven't found more data about the process of recording itself or more detailed information about the other conditions of collaboration between the publishing house and the chanter. As the initiator of the whole process, Dimitrijević was himself particularly devoted to the promotion and distribution of the records. He was in regular contact with the clergy, primarily for the requests for publishing, but also for recommendations for the recording's wider use in church parishes, schools, monasteries, and theological seminars, among educated church chanters and laymen as well. Obviously, the Synod of the Serbian Orthodox Church did give him the consent in principle, but afterwards his private efforts, helped by his merchant relationships in the country and abroad, initiated the main mechanisms of popularization and distribution of the records. The great part of the total number of the collection and particular recordings were distributed as presents without any financial compensation. For example, Dimitrijević prepared the complete collection as a present to Cathedral Church in Belgrade, and the 2 sets of records to their Royal Majesties, King Peter II and Prince Pavle Karađorđević. The advertisements for the purchase within the articles in newspapers, mostly signed by Dimitrijević, brought the news about the importance and the content of the new edition, as well as the recommendation for the interested to buy a specially selected Edison Bell's gramophone in addition to the records. The available data about the prices of the records and gramophones and some of the responses to the offer show that not all the users had the opportunity to afford the whole collection, which was certainly due to the general economic crisis which caused the poorer sale of the records in the 4th decade in Yugoslavia. Within detailed analysis of the creation Christmas songs in the Edison Bell Penkala's industry, it was observed that there was quite a small number of songs in total on the records, which represented just the most popular part of the whole festive repertoire. And toward that view, recording industry played a role in limiting and standardizing the repertoire in this field, as it was seen by our colleague Seribasić. On the other hand, the content of the Conservatory shows just the opposite condition, considering very a wide corpus of recorded hymns and the ideas for its wider use. The importance of the recorded material was quite quickly recognized, and the complete collections were delivered to seminaries, dioceses, church communities, and laymen. During the 40s, it was widely used for studying in Serbian monasteries, making its way, first of all, to those on Fruška Gora and elsewhere in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, as you can see here on the slide, but also to Hungary. A special interesting issue about the wider use of this edition shed special light to the status of the church music in everyday life. One of the earliest gramophone records of the Edison Bell Penkala captured a live performance of Christmas songs in the Zagreb Cathedral in December 1927. The promotional material connected to that edition, with the slogan "Christmas in your home," seen in parallel with similar advertisements for music for dancing, or the folk traditional music, the gusle, provokes many questions and further research of the status of the genre of church music, not only within the first Yugoslav publishing house's politics, but also in the private life sphere in that period in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Numerous private notes in the Serbian memoir literature from the 19th and 20th centuries testify to the presence of the liturgical music in the everyday life of laics. The electrification, availability of gramophones and records in the first decades of the 20th century, and new possibilities for music experience of listening in both urban and rural environments surely did strengthen and broaden such practice. The advertising was carefully performed also among the Serbian Orthodox communities abroad. Dimitrijević, for example, emphasized its significance in Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Hungary, where the Orthodox churches have been founded after the First World War. And shortly after publication, the edition attracted exceptionally great attention of the Serbian diaspora in the United States, among whom there was a strong interest in this area of musical heritage. Lera's and Dimitrijević's correspondence with the General Secretary of the Serbian Singing Association in Detroit shows that the importance of the audio edition was fully recognized. Nevertheless, the archival sources show also that already from the 50s, in homeland and also in diaspora, the interest for the edition was notably poor, and further social political circumstances caused notably less favorable conditions for the church music practicing and research, so it didn't reach wider popularity. Close listening inspires further discussion about these historical recordings, aspects of performance styles, and the impacts on the changes of manners in interpretation through the time. Detailed examination of the edition opens different possibilities for research of the Serbian chant throughout the period in which the recordings were made, and more broadly for a study of the development of this tradition during the 20th century and its vitality until today. After the Conservatory, any similar representative audio compilation, which might as well serve as an important didactical source, wasn't created again. Although the style of performing has changed compared to Lera's very slow singing, the continuity is obvious in the repertoire and the melodies themselves. A further research might be conducted towards the study of the activities of the collaborators and direct heirs of Lera that would also show the characteristics of today's practice, with the goal of gaining better understanding of the dynamics of the tradition, its changes, repertoire, musical expression, and so on. The characteristics of recordings also present us with important questions of aesthetics of musical performance, features of the material recorded in studio for education purposes, but as a representation of traditional church chant, as was seen by Weber. From the analytical, theoretical angle, the more frequent editions of different church music traditions over the last 5 decades were studied with a focus on the relation between the recording and the actual liturgical musical repertoire. It was noticed that on the one hand, the recordings could be seen as a reconstruction of the liturgical musical sequence and the unique display of the liturgical repertoire current at a certain point, while on the other side, they have the potential to become a model for an authentic representation of the liturgical music in different contexts. Having in mind the view that the revitalization of the old music through audio recordings, that is, through the process of recording itself, has influence especially on the performing practice itself, The recordings represented in this paper may also be observed as a path towards the historical informed performance of a kind. The latest recordings have been digitized as a part of the activities of the Institute of Musicology and within the activities of Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts, and the project of their publishing within a new MP3 edition is in progress, led. Considering that teaching of Serbian church chant in our surroundings is still primarily dependent on the oral methods and oral traditions, despite a number of invaluable written musical sources, it is certain that wider accessibility of this edition would increase its didactical potential. And first of all, the modern edition will surely enable the wider public to support the introducing, studying, learning, preservation, and passing forward this unique musical practice and cultural heritage. Thank you.